The warning they ignored. The Galactic Dominion was the most powerful empire in the known universe. For centuries, they had conquered world after world, leaving nothing but destruction in their wake. Their warlords believed no species could stand against them. And now, they had set their sights on Earth. A massive Dominion fleet, led by High Warlord Crexen, gathered at the edge of the solar system. Their ships, dark and menacing, floated like shadows in space. Crexen looked at the holographic display before him. The blue and green planet of Earth rotated slowly. A primitive world. Crexen scoffed. Their technology is laughable. Their defenses are weak. This will be over in days. But before the fleet could begin its assault, a message came through. It was from Earth. A deep, calm voice spoke in perfect Dominion language. Turn back now. This is your only warning. The warlords inside the command ship stared at the screen. Then, laughter filled the room. A warning? From these weaklings? One of the generals sneered. How amusing. Crexen grinned. Typical of lesser species, they beg for mercy when they see true power. The message ended, and silence returned to the bridge. Then, Crexen raised his hand and gave the order. Proceed with the invasion. The Dominion fleet moved forward. Thousands of warships entered the solar system, heading straight for Earth. Their weapons were fully charged, their troops ready to strike. They expected no resistance. But something was wrong. As soon as they crossed into the solar system, their ships began to experience strange malfunctions. Weapon systems flickered. Shields failed. Communication signals distorted. Crexen frowned. Report. What is happening? A panicked officer turned to him. High Warlord, our systems are failing. Our long-range scanners are offline. Crexen growled. This must be some natural interference. Continue the approach. The fleet pushed forward. Mars passed beneath them. The asteroid belt stretched ahead. And then, the first ship exploded. It was sudden, without warning. A massive Dominion battleship, one of their strongest, burst into flames. What? Crexen roared. Who dares attack us? No enemy fleet was visible. No missiles had been launched. Yet another ship erupted in fire. Then another. Panic spread through the fleet. Sir, we are under attack, but we cannot see the enemy. Crexen's eyes widened. Impossible. Then, the screens inside his command ship flickered. The same calm voice from before spoke again. You were warned. A chill ran through Crexen's body. And then, the real nightmare began. Hundreds of hidden defense satellites, disguised as harmless space debris, activated. Their weapons locked onto the Dominion fleet with terrifying accuracy. Energy beams, railguns, EMP pulses. Ships exploded one after another. Dominion soldiers tried to fight back, but their weapons failed. Their systems had been hacked, their ships turned against them. This is a trap, a Dominion officer screamed. They were ready for us. Crexen's mind raced. How could a primitive species have technology that could outmatch the Dominion? More explosions, more chaos. The invasion fleet was being systematically wiped out, and they couldn't even see their enemy. Crexen slammed his fist against the control panel. We are the Dominion. We do not fall to weaklings. But deep down, for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. The calm voice returned. Leave now, or be erased. Crexen's heart pounded. His fleet was crumbling. He had to make a choice. Retreat and live, or stay and be destroyed. Cliffhanger. As he hesitated, his command ship's lights flickered. Then, a single message appeared on the screen. You should have listened. The ship shook violently. An explosion ripped through the lower decks. The Dominion's flagship, its most powerful warship, was the next target. Crexen's ship trembled as another explosion tore through the Dominion fleet. His command deck was in chaos. Alarms blared. Officers scrambled for answers, and the massive holographic display in front of him showed the terrifying reality. The once mighty Dominion fleet, a force that had crushed countless civilizations, was now helpless. Warships detonated like firecrackers in the void of space, their shields and weapons failing without reason. "This is impossible," Crexen growled, gripping the control panel. "Where is the enemy? Who dares to defy us?" But there was no visible enemy. The destruction was coming from nowhere. His sensors detected no incoming missiles, no starships firing at them. Yet his warships were being erased from existence, one by one. "Sir, our shields are completely offline," a panicked officer shouted. "Weapons are disabled. Engines are failing." Crexen clenched his fists. "How? Who has this kind of power?" Then the voice returned. Calm. Cold. Inhuman. "You were warned." Crexen's blood ran cold. His officers stared at him, fear in their eyes. He had dismissed humanity as weak. He had laughed at their warning. Now he realized his mistake. Earth had been waiting for them. A Dominion dreadnought, one of their most powerful warships, drifted out of formation, its crew desperately trying to regain control. It never got the chance. A beam of pure energy ripped through its hull, splitting the massive vessel in two. Crexen watched in horror as its remains were pulled into a swirling vortex, a weapon unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. This isn't possible," he whispered. More ships vanished into the void, their signals erased from the fleet's network, as if they had never existed. "Sir," another officer screamed, "something is inside our ships." Crexen's eyes snapped toward the screen. Security footage from multiple Dominion vessels flickered into view, and there, in the dimly lit corridors of his own ships, something moved. Shadows, figures, humans. Somehow, against all logic, humans were already aboard their ships, before the invasion even began. They were eliminating Dominion officers, disabling critical systems, and turning the fleet's own weapons against them. One Dominion general, a veteran of 1,000 battles, was dragged into the darkness. His screams were cut short. Crexen's stomach twisted. Impossible. They shouldn't be able to do this. The screen changed again. A new message appeared. "You are not the hunter. You are the prey." Then the real horror began. One by one, Dominion warships turned against their own fleet. Turrets swiveled, targeting their own allies. Entire battalions of Dominion soldiers vanished from security feeds. Crexen watched, powerless, as the invasion fleet collapsed from within. Earth had never been the weak ones. The Dominion had walked into a perfectly laid trap. The High Warlord gritted his teeth. No, I refuse to lose to these primitive." The ship lurched violently. Sparks flew from the consoles. The lights flickered, then went dark. Total systems failure. And then, for the first time, Crexen saw it. Outside his viewport, floating in the distance, was a shape. A ship. But not a Dominion warship. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Sleek, black, silent. And then, as if sensing his gaze, the ship's hull shifted. It disappeared. Vanished without a trace. Crexen's breath caught in his throat. The humans had stealth technology beyond anything the Dominion could comprehend. They had been inside the fleet before they had even entered the solar system. This wasn't an invasion. It was a slaughter, a trap that had been years in the making. Crexen gritted his teeth. "All ships, retreat. Now." His officers hesitated. They had never been ordered to retreat before. "I said no." The remaining Dominion ships tried to break away. Engines flared, warships spun around, desperate to escape. But it was too late. One by one, the warships were picked off, like prey in the jaws of an unseen predator. Crexen's hands clenched into fists. Humanity wasn't just fighting back. They were hunting them. And they were winning. The once invincible Dominion fleet was being erased from the stars. Crexen's ship shook violently as another blast struck its side. Fires spread across the control deck. His officers screamed as the flames consumed them. Through the smoke and destruction, Crexon stumbled toward the escape pod. He refused to die here. As he launched away from the crumbling remains of his command ship, he saw Earth in the distance, and for the first time in his life, the great High Warlord Crexon felt something new. Not hatred, not anger, fear, because humanity wasn't just fighting the Dominion. They were ending it, and Crexon knew this was only the beginning. Crexon's escape pod drifted through the wreckage of his once mighty fleet. Shattered Dominion warships floated lifelessly, their hulls torn apart by an invisible enemy. Fires burned in the void of space, flickering briefly before the cold consumed them. The High Warlord gritted his teeth, his mind racing. This was supposed to be an easy conquest. Earth was supposed to be weak. Instead, his armada had been annihilated, their most advanced warships helpless against an enemy they couldn't even see. And now, Crexon was running. Inside the escape pod, the emergency display flickered. A single Dominion battleship, the Varthun, had survived the slaughter and was locking onto his distress beacon. A moment later, the pod shuddered as it was pulled into the docking bay. The doors hissed open, and Crexon stumbled out, met by a terrified bridge crew. "High Warlord," one of his officers stammered. We thought you were dead." Crexon's eyes burned with rage. "If you wish to live, get us out of here. Now." The Varthun's engines roared to life. The few remaining Dominion warships attempted to retreat, their damaged hulls barely holding together. But as the ship turned to flee, something shifted in the darkness of space. A shadow moved. No, many shadows. Hundreds of them. At first, Crexon thought it was debris, wreckage from the battle. But then, the shadows closed in. Shapes emerged from the void. Silent, black ships that had no Dominion records, no identification signals. Human warships. Unlike anything the Dominion had ever encountered. Crexon's breath caught in his throat. They were waiting for this. They had let the survivors escape, only to ambush them again. His officer turned pale. "Sir, they're everywhere." Crexon slammed his fist on the control panel. "Open fire." The Varthun's weapons charged, but before a single shot could be fired, the ship's systems shut down. Lights flickered. Screens went black. The warship drifted helplessly as the void swallowed them. Then the sound of something tearing through the hull echoed through the ship. A moment later, the lights flickered back on, bathed in red. And the alarm started screaming. Crexon turned sharply as the security feed activated. The crew gathered around the screens. The footage showed the lower decks. Dominion soldiers, armed and ready, patrolled the halls. Their weapons were raised, their eyes scanning the shadows. Then, the shadows moved. Figures emerged from the darkness. Humans. But not like any humans Crexon had seen before. They wore sleek, black armor, their helmets featureless, their movements too precise, too fast. And they weren't using guns. They fought with blades, cutting through Dominion warriors in absolute silence. One Dominion soldier turned to fire, only for a black-armored figure to appear behind him. A single strike, a blade through his throat, and the soldier collapsed. The humans vanished into the darkness before the others even realized what had happened. One by one, the crew was being hunted. Crexon's officer gasped. How did they get on board? Crexon clenched his fists. They were already here. His mind raced. This was no ordinary human military. This was something else. They had planned this. The Dominion had spent centuries believing themselves to be the ultimate power in the galaxy. They had conquered countless worlds, enslaved entire species. But humanity had studied them, watched them, waited. And when the Dominion finally came, humanity was ready. The security feed crackled. The camera in the engineering bay flickered. A Dominion officer's voice came through, shaking, terrified. "They're in the reactor room. We have to." A scream. The feed cut to static. Then, the red warning lights shifted to blue. The ship's once controlled by the Dominion, was now displaying human symbols. A message appeared on every screen. You no longer control this vessel. Crexen's breath came fast and uneven. His own warship had been hijacked from the inside. A chilling thought crossed his mind. What if it wasn't just this ship? What if humanity had already infiltrated the entire Dominion? Suddenly, the room grew cold. The bridge crew turned as a figure stepped through the doors. A human. Not in armor. Not a soldier. But someone worse. A man in a sleek, dark uniform, his expression calm, his eyes cold. Crexen recognized him instantly. The same voice that had given the warning. The human smiled. You should have listened. Then, the ship's self-destruct alarms began to blare. Crexen had 5 minutes to escape, if he could. The alarms blared through the ship, a deafening wail that signaled only one thing. Destruction was imminent. Crexen's mind raced as he stared at the human standing before him. The man wasn't armed. He didn't need to be. The Dominion had ruled through fear, conquering, enslaving, annihilating anyone who resisted. But now, for the first time in history, they were the ones being hunted. The human in front of him, calm, unshaken, was proof of that. Crexen bared his fangs. What have you done? The human tilted his head slightly, as if amused. We gave you a warning. You ignored it. He gestured around them. Now you're paying the price. Crexen's claws dug into his palms. He wanted to tear this creature apart, but rage would not save him now. His flagship was falling apart. The blue emergency lights cast an eerie glow over the command deck. He had 5 minutes before the self-destruct sequence obliterated everything. The other Dominion officers were frozen, paralyzed by fear. The High Warlord sneered at their weakness. If they would not act, then he would. With a snarl, he lunged at the human. His claws slashed through the air, and met nothing. The human had stepped aside at the last moment, fluid and precise, as if he had predicted the attack before Crexen even moved. Crexen spun, his fury boiling over. But a single strike from the human sent him crashing to the floor. Pain shot through his ribs. How? He was a warrior, trained in Dominion combat arts, his body enhanced by generations of selective breeding. And yet, this human, smaller, weaker, had dropped him with a single blow. Crexen coughed, tasting blood. He forced himself up, snarling. You fight like a coward. The human sighed. Your kind always says that. Then, without another word, the human turned away and walked toward the exit. Crexen's rage flared. You dare turn your back on me. The human paused at the door, his voice calm. You're already dead, Crexen. You just haven't realized it yet. Then, he was gone. The doors sealed shut behind him. Crexen forced himself to his feet, his vision swimming. The ship's countdown continued. 4 minutes. He had to escape. The Dominion officers on the bridge snapped out of their fear, scrambling for an answer. Sir, the escape pods are locked. Crexen's heart pounded. Humanity had taken control of the ship's systems. They weren't just destroying the vessel. They were trapping them inside. A Dominion officer frantically typed into the controls, trying to override the locks. I think I can break the encryption. Crexen moved beside him, watching the screen as the Dominion code was rapidly being rewritten, replaced by something else. Then, a message appeared. Too late. Crexen barely had time to react before the bridge was thrown into chaos. The lights flickered. The ship shook violently. Something was happening. The security feed crackled to life, showing the exterior of the ship. The Varthon was surrounded. Hundreds of human ships. But they weren't attacking. Instead, they were activating something. A massive ring-like structure was unfolding around the Dominion battleship, dark metal shifting and interlocking, glowing lines of energy pulsing through its frame. Crexen's eyes narrowed. What is that? No one answered. Then, without warning, the ship lurched. Gravity shifted. Crexen felt his stomach drop as a sudden force pulled the entire vessel forward. A tear in space itself had opened before them, a swirling, crackling abyss of darkness. A wormhole. The ship was being sucked into it. No, Crexen roared, slamming his fist against the console. Reverse engines. Break free. It's no use. An officer shouted, panic in his voice. Something is pulling us through. We can't stop it. The ship's massive engines fired at full power, struggling against the pull. But it was pointless. The last thing Crexen saw before the ship was completely consumed was the blue-green planet of Earth, untouched and defiant. Then, darkness. Everything stretched, twisted, collapsed. The Dominion battleship was gone. The sensation of falling was overwhelming. Then, impact. The Varthuan slammed into something solid. Crexen's head struck the console. Pain flared through his skull. The world spun. The alarms stopped. The ship was no longer falling, no longer in space. Groaning, Crexen pushed himself up, blinking through the dizziness. The bridge was still intact, barely. Sparks rained from the ceiling. Half the systems were dead. His crew lay scattered, groaning in pain, struggling to rise. Crexen staggered toward the viewport, and what he saw froze him in place. They were no longer in space. The stars were gone. Instead, outside the ship was a barren, lifeless wasteland. Jagged mountains in the distance, an orange-red sky, swirling with thick clouds. And then, the shadows moved, far away but closing in fast. Figures. Not human. Not Dominion. Something else. Crexen's claws clenched. Where had they taken him? A whisper echoed through the ruined ship's speakers. Welcome to your new home. Then, silence. The bridge was eerily silent. The alarms had died. The ship had stopped shaking, but the unease in Crexen's gut was worse than anything he had ever felt in battle. Outside the shattered viewport, the world was wrong. The sky burned a dull, angry orange, with thick, swirling clouds that stretched endlessly in every direction. The landscape was barren. No rivers, no vegetation, no signs of life. Just jagged rock formations, cracked earth, and an unsettling emptiness. But Crexen knew better. This place was not empty. The shadows in the distance weren't just tricks of the light. They moved. Figures shifted against the horizon. Tall, thin, unnatural. Crexen's claws clenched. Where had the humans sent them? His officers stirred around him, groaning as they pulled themselves off the floor. The bridge was wrecked. Half the systems were down, some entirely fried. Sparks rained from broken conduits. The Dominion warship, the mighty Varthuan, had been reduced to a crippled wreck. Damage report, Crexen barked. His voice was rough, filled with barely contained fury. An officer, his scales pale with fear, scrambled to a flickering console. "Yes, sir, the main reactor is dead. Emergency power at 4%. Weapons are offline. Shields gone." Crexen's fists clenched. They had been crippled on purpose. The humans hadn't just destroyed them. They had chosen to send them here, in this state. They wanted the Dominion to suffer. Another officer swallowed hard. "Sir, external sensors show. No star charts. No celestial markers. I don't even think we're in known space." That was impossible. The Dominion had mapped most of the galaxy. No matter where they were, there should be something recognizable. But there was nothing. Just this dead world. And those things in the distance. Crexen turned sharply. Atmosphere. The officer checked the readings. Thin, but breathable. Gravity is slightly heavier than standard. We can survive. A bitter laugh escaped Crexen's throat. Survive. They weren't meant to survive. They were being punished. For centuries, the Dominion had crushed weaker species beneath their boots, believing themselves to be invincible. The humans had changed that. And now, the mighty Dominion fleet, the pride of the Empire, was stranded on an unknown world. Without resources, without reinforcements, without hope, a fate worse than death. Crexen turned to his officers, his slit pupils narrowing. "We need to regroup. Get every surviving warrior to the armory. Gather weapons, armor, anything that still functions." One of his officers hesitated. "Sir, if we don't fix the ship." Crexen grabbed him by the throat. The officer gagged, claws scraping at Crexen's armored arm. "You think the ship will save us?" Crexen snarled. "The humans let us keep it because it is useless. We are nothing more than prey here." He threw the officer aside. The Dominion warrior coughed, clutching his throat, but said nothing more. Crexen turned back to the viewport. The figures in the distance had moved closer. They were watching, waiting, not attacking. Not yet. That was what unsettled him the most. They weren't afraid. They should have been terrified. The Dominion were apex predators, conquerors of worlds. And yet, whatever was out there, it didn't fear them. That meant one of two things. Either it was stupid, or it was stronger. Crexen's claws twitched. "Prepare a scouting team. I want to know what we're dealing with before we make our next move." His warriors hesitated. Crexen felt their fear, smelled it in the air. These were battle-hardened soldiers, warriors who had raised civilizations without breaking a sweat. And yet here, on this world, they were afraid. For the first time in their lives, they had no idea what they were up against. Crexen bared his fangs. The only way to survive was to take back control. The moment they started acting like prey, they would become prey. "Move," he barked. Reluctantly, the warriors obeyed. The air outside was thick and dry, carrying the faint scent of sulfur and decay. Crexen and his scouting team moved cautiously, their weapons drawn. Their armor, once symbols of Dominion power, felt heavy and useless in this place. The shadows had vanished. But Crexen knew they were still out there, watching, waiting. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, a vast, barren desert of jagged stone and cracked earth. The sky never darkened, never changed. There was no sun, no stars, just the suffocating orange glow of an endless horizon. Then one of his warriors stopped. "Sir, look." Crexen followed his gaze. Bones, scattered across the ground. Massive, some twice the size of a Dominion warbeast. This world had been home to something before. Something big, something that had died. A chill ran through Crexen's spine. The bones were old, but the claw marks on them were fresh. One of his warriors hissed. What kind of creature could kill something like this? Crexen did not answer, because he knew the real question was far worse. Were they still here? Then the wind shifted. A sound. Low, distant. A deep, unnatural clicking noise that made every Dominion warrior freeze. It came from every direction. A voice, not human, not Dominion, echoed through the wasteland. "You do not belong here." Crexen's blood ran cold. They were surrounded, and the hunt had begun. The clicking grew louder. At first, it was distant, an eerie, rhythmic sound that sent a cold shiver through every Dominion warrior's spine. But then it surrounded them, coming from all sides, growing sharper, closer. The scouts raised their weapons, forming a defensive circle. Their reptilian eyes darted across the endless wasteland, scanning the jagged rocks and barren ground. Nothing. Yet Crexen knew better. Nothing did not make a sound. The creatures were here, watching, waiting. Crexen's grip tightened on his blade. His pulse was steady, but his warriors were already cracking. Their tails twitched, their breathing grew erratic. These were elite Dominion soldiers, killers who had slaughtered thousands without hesitation. And yet, they had never felt hunted before. Now they did. Then, the first scream. It was quick, brutal. One of the scouts, gone. No gunfire, no struggle, just a blur of motion, a guttural choking sound. And then, nothing. The Dominion warriors spun, weapons trained, but there was no body. Only a smear of dark blue blood across the cracked ground. Crexen didn't flinch. He had expected this. Whatever was hunting them was testing them, finding weaknesses. They wouldn't charge like mindless beasts. They would wear them down. Another clicking sound, closer now. Another blur. Another warrior gone. Panic set in. The circle of soldiers broke apart. Big mistake. As soon as the formation fractured, the creatures struck in force. They moved faster than the eye could track. Tall, thin, shifting through the wasteland like living shadows. They didn't make a sound when they moved. No footsteps. No growls. Only clicking. It was psychological warfare. The Dominion were used to overpowering their enemies, crushing them with brute force. But this was different. This was fear. Crexen roared, "Stand your ground." The remaining warriors fought to regroup, but it was already too late. A monstrous shape lunged from the shadows, its claws gleaming in the dim, hellish light. For the first time, Crexen saw one clearly. The creature was tall, easily twice his height, its elongated body covered in obsidian-like exoskeleton armor. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a sleek, nightmarish form that seemed designed to kill. And then, it struck. Crexen barely dodged. The razor-sharp claws sliced through the air, missing his throat by inches. He countered, slashing with his blade. A perfect, lethal strike. The blade bounced off. Crexen's mind reeled. Dominion steel could cut through starship hulls, yet it had done nothing. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if curious. Then, with terrifying speed, it lashed out again. Crexen managed to roll away, but another warrior wasn't so lucky. A clawed hand shot forward, piercing straight through Dominion armor. The soldier gasped, his body jerking violently, before being ripped in half. Effortlessly. Crexen had seen many horrors in war, but he had never seen Dominion warriors die so easily. The battlefield dissolved into chaos. The warriors who tried to run were cut down instantly. The ones who fought lasted only seconds longer. Crexen's mind raced. They weren't going to win this fight. The Dominion had never been outmatched like this. Never. And yet, here they were, dying. Crexen made a decision. "Fall back to the ship," he bellowed. The survivors didn't hesitate. They ran. But the creatures didn't chase. Instead, they let them go. Crexen glanced back once, just for a second. The creatures had already vanished, blending back into the shadows like they were never there. They could have wiped them all out. They chose not to. The survivors reached the Dominion warship, panting, bleeding, shaken to their cores. They had lost half their team. In minutes, inside the ruined bridge, the officers who had stayed behind stared in horror at the blood-soaked survivors. "What happened?" one asked. Crexen said nothing. His mind was still processing the impossible. They had fought countless species across the galaxy. They had won every war. And yet here, on this cursed world, they were nothing. Crexen turned to the main console. He activated the ship's internal logs and began recording. "This is High Warlord Crexen," he said. His voice was calm, controlled. "The Dominion fleet has been defeated. The humans have sent us to this world, a place without name, without mercy." He stared at the viewport. The wasteland stretched before him. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, the creatures were waiting. "We believed ourselves to be the apex predators of the galaxy," he continued. "We were wrong." He ended the recording. Then, for the first time in his life, Crexen felt something he had never known before. Not anger, not rage, not defiance, doubt. The silence inside the ship was suffocating. The surviving Dominion warriors sat in tense, Motionless silence, their armor stained with the blood of their fallen comrades. Some stared at the walls. Others gripped their weapons so tightly their claws left dents in the metal. No one spoke. No one dared to. Crexen stood at the front of the ruined bridge, his mind racing. He had fought in countless wars. He had conquered worlds, annihilated entire civilizations, broken species who had dared to resist the Dominion's will. But this was different. They weren't fighting an enemy that could be crushed through force. They weren't even fighting anymore. They were being punished. The humans had known exactly what they were doing. They could have wiped out the Dominion fleet. Instead, they had chosen this, stranding them on this world, leaving them to die slowly. Crexen turned to his officers. Status on the ship. One of them swallowed hard. Still crippled, High Warlord. Even if we get emergency power running, there's no way to leave orbit. The hyperdrive is fried. Crexen clenched his fists. Of course, the humans had let them keep the illusion of a functioning ship, enough power to give them hope, but never enough to escape. Another officer hesitated before speaking. Sir, we need to find shelter. We can't stay here. Those things, they're watching us. Crexen knew he was right. Even now, he could feel it. The creatures in the wasteland weren't attacking. Not yet, but they were still there. Waiting. Studying. Hunting. They had tested the Dominion once. They knew their weaknesses now. The next time they struck, they wouldn't stop until everyone was dead. Crexen exhaled slowly. His kind didn't feel fear the way weaker species did, but this was something deeper. It wasn't just fear of death. It was fear of becoming prey. The Dominion had always believed they were the pinnacle of evolution. But now they were just animals in a cage, waiting for the slaughter. No, not like this. Crexen turned sharply. Gather every last piece of functioning equipment. Weapons, scanners, survival gear. Everything. We're abandoning the ship. His officers tensed. Abandoning. Sir, this is our only. Crexen slammed his clawed fist against the nearest console, cracking the reinforced metal. This ship is a coffin. The moment those creatures come, we'll be trapped inside and slaughtered. We leave. Now. The warriors hesitated, but only for a moment. They knew Crexen was right. The Dominion warband moved cautiously through the wasteland, weapons raised, senses sharp. The orange sky stretched endlessly overhead, never changing, never darkening. The ground beneath them was dry and cracked, the jagged rock formations casting long, unnatural shadows. The creatures were nowhere to be seen. But Crexen knew better. They were still out there, watching, waiting. The warriors marched in grim silence, their previous arrogance shattered. They were no longer the mighty Dominion fleet. They were survivors. And the worst part, they didn't even know if survival was possible. Then, after hours of travel, they saw it. A structure, massive, ancient, buried partially beneath the sands. At first, Crexen thought it was just a ruin. But as they got closer, he realized it was not abandoned. There were lights. Dim, flickering blue lights embedded into the walls. Technology. One of his officers whispered, "This world isn't dead." Crexen's slit pupils narrowed. No, it was something worse. This world had been a prison, and someone had built it. As they approached, the massive entrance to the structure loomed over them like the mouth of a beast. It was covered in strange symbols, etched deep into the metal, a language Crexen had never seen before. The doors were partially open. Something had forced them apart. The Dominion warriors hesitated. Everything about this place screamed danger. But they had no choice. Stay outside, and the creatures would hunt them down. Go inside, and they might find answers. Crexen stepped forward. "We move in." His warriors exchanged uneasy glances but obeyed. They entered the darkness. Inside, the air was cold. stale, ancient. The walls were smooth metal, reinforced with strange materials that weren't Dominion, human, or anything else they had ever encountered. The deeper they went, the more unsettling it became. Skeletons, scattered along the hallways. Not just one species, several. Some Crexen recognized, some he did not. All of them had died here. Then, at the heart of the structure, they found the chamber. A massive circular room filled with dead machines, their purpose unknown. And at the center, a control panel. Crexen approached it carefully. The markings on the console were old, faded, but when he pressed a single button, the room came to life. A flickering hologram appeared. Not a message, not a warning, a recording. The image was distorted, but the voice was clear. And it was not human. It spoke in a guttural, alien tongue, one the Dominion translation implants barely deciphered. Last of our kind, condemned to this place. Nothing escapes. The hologram glitched. Not a planet, a tomb, a prison for monsters. Do not wake them. Then, the final words. The architects locked them away. Even we were not meant to find this place. If you are here, it is too late. The message ended. Silence. One of Crexen's officers whispered, voice shaking. This isn't a battlefield. Crexen's claws curled into a fist. No, this is a graveyard. And then, the clicking returned, louder than before, coming from deep within the structure. The Dominion warriors raised their weapons, their bodies tensed in horror. The things outside hadn't followed them, because they had known what was waiting inside. And now, it was awake.